Thanks for coming, Clancy, and thanks, Yella, for the introduction. I'm, again, apologise for anyone not being able to understand me.
They're really hard on you about that.
Yeah, I know. Everyone's hard on me about it. Just like to start off, if you just let everyone know kind of how you got to Dow Jones and
How I got to Dow Jones.
What led you there?
How did I end up here? So I spent about 6.5 years working at Google, based in London, back and forth to Mountain View. I primarily worked on Google Analytics, and I launched a product called Google Analytics Premium. Brilliant idea. We took the free version of Google Analytics and started charging people for it. So if you have any questions about commercialization strategy. And then I left Google to actually go work at a startup, which sadly is no longer around, and started advising and working for a bunch of other startups around sort of data and product management. And then I started at Google originally at Dow Jones, originally as the chief data officer, and have moved steadily into a role of chief product and technology officer, overseeing our businesses that are around data monetization, data sales, so our risk and compliance, VentureSource, Factiva, and our DNA platform. So.
Nice. So your title is Chief Product and Technology Officer, and the title of this talk's Tech Innovation within an Established Business. I'd like to kind of delve into what your role looks like day to day and how that works in terms of innovation.
Yeah, it's so with a company like Dow Jones, and this is sort of the pros and cons of being a part of an established business as opposed to a startup, is that we have a pretty significant portion of our business and our profit comes from established companies. And so trying to find a balance between how you work in the sort of the incremental innovation, responding to customer needs, working to increase profitability in those established businesses, but also find new opportunities, find new directions, either sort of lateral opportunities or vertical opportunities to move into. And it is a balancing act, and it's one of those things that I think any company gets into a stage where they have to start making hard decisions on balancing true innovation, trying new things, and keeping the lights on, extracting further value from the core businesses. So it's there's not a typical day, I'd say.
Yeah. So a lot of people in the audience are from startups. They come from a background where it's quite easy to pivot and quite easy to kind of shift quite quickly. What is your experience kind of within an established business of pivoting and making those kind of innovative changes?
Yeah, I would be lying to you if I said it's easy to pivot a large established business. And actually, in many cases, you don't need to pivot. I guess there's always a grass is always greener kind of effect when you're working at a big company. You look out at like all these companies are working for startups, and you sort of say, oh, you go in one morning, you basically can say, let's actually go in that direction, and you do. With Dow Jones and larger companies, you have to sort of break off a little bit your sort of innovation, and if you see a new opportunity, you have to figure out ways to actually capitalize on that opportunity without disrupting the boat. I think there's a common analogy of, it's rather than piloting a speedboat like a startup, you're piloting more of an oil tanker. Now, you're not going to necessarily be able to like turn an oil tanker as fast as you can turn a speedboat, but you can do things like, I don't know, drop jet skis off the side and try to go out to find those sort of new opportunities and new areas for expansion. However, it is a bit different in the sense that when you're dealing with venture-backed companies or dealing with venture capitalists like Atomico, whoever, you're dealing with a very different risk profile or risk tolerance profile. And in the cases of trying to identify new opportunities as a startup, you do get the benefit of working with a bunch of sort of, don't mean to be rude about it, but like magical thinkers, people who you can sort of sell them on a vision one day and actually get the go-ahead to move in that direction. Whereas with more established businesses, there's a lot more spreadsheets, I guess, involved and a lot more sort of making the business case, right? Because anything that could be seen as a potential cannibalization or even the opportunity cost of any investment is investment in that existing business. There's a lot more questioning that you have to go through, but I think it makes sense, and that's...
Yeah, so in terms of the people you attract, it's more those kind of in-the-box thinkers that, is that true, or?
No, I would take exception to that. We're not going to fight over it, but
we might.
I think there's what's tricky is that everybody, especially at a company like Dow Jones, that everybody has a certain drive to make things better for themselves, for our customers, for the business, and in a small startup, you can really sort of move quickly as an individual on those things, and it's easier to have your voice heard if you're only in an office with 5 people or on a Slack channel with 3 people. But so it is important in a company like Dow Jones to develop the tools for people to communicate the ideas that they have. I mean, the best ideas that we have come from not necessarily like our CEO. He has great ideas. I'm not saying anything about our CEO. But some of the best ideas actually come from people who are interacting on a day-to-day basis with our customers, our salespeople, our data strategy researchers, the people who are able to sort of say, and how do you build the channels for them to say, I have an idea, how can I turn this into more of an opportunity? And that's where I believe we do have a lot of innovative, out-of-the-box thinkers. You just need to enable them to do something with that.
Yeah, okay. That's really nice to hear. And I think we had a chat yesterday about co-creation and about design sprints, et cetera, et cetera. I think being able to do that within a large established company, you're doing something right in terms of innovation. So what, in terms of the customers that you look for in order to co-create products with, what do you look for in your customers and your clients with that?
Yeah, I think with co-creation, which is just effectively us spending more time not only innovating internally, but actually working with our customers. I mean, who better to actually help articulate customer problems than the customer themselves? And one of the benefits that we have as an established business, with 137 years of a brand that stands for trust and speed, is that we have this almost a backlog of customers that look to us for sort of thought leadership and say, what should we be doing with the news and the data and the information that you provide? What are other customers doing? And so we're increasingly developing the capability of bringing those customers in and saying, well, let's actually focus in sort of a design sprint, 3-day to, we have longer periods that we're also investigating, sprint of really understanding what it is that you're trying to get from the news. Increasingly, people are trying to find signal in all this sort of vast amounts of information, trying to find truth in a lot of noise. And when you bring those customers in, something kind of interesting happens where if they're part of that development process, their tolerances for using new products or using like the MVP change. They actually feel like as part of it, they can't be as critical. Now, for us, it is also a little bit of a balancing act because some of our customers do have sort of mission critical use cases of the news and data that we provide. And it's not always easy with some of those companies, let's call them less enlightened companies, to say, hey, do you want to test something with us and maybe it'll work and it'll probably go down once or twice. So it really is an important part of building a partnership and relationship with those customers and identifying the ones who are eager to solve problems. And actually, part of the great thing about the co-creation process is actually they have to put skin in the game. They have to actually dedicate some of their people to sit with us and develop this. So that's a good sort of gating factor in a sense. If a company just wants to treat you as a custom solution developer, that's not really the work that we're trying to do. We're trying to really say, how can we build something new with you? But it's tricky.
Yeah, that was quite an elegant way of putting the very, very, very elegant.
Thank you.
So we touched a little bit on those out-of-the-box thinkers and people who can think about outside their vertical, and that you think you've got a lot of those people. So do you look for those kind of out-of-the-box developers who can think like designers, and what value do you put on that?
Yeah, a major part of us trying to identify talent, and this is one of the reasons actually that we are expanding our Barcelona office, in the sense we have about 250 employees here in Barcelona, primarily in our data research, data strategy, and our newsroom. And we are building out more of our engineering and data science capability here in Barcelona. And the reason we're doing that is because one of the great things about this city and our office here is the access to talent, which we've heard a lot of speakers mention, but also the amount of diversity that we're actually able to have. So in our office we have, I think it's about 50, I'm going to get this wrong. I'm going to get switched up and somebody's going to yell at me later. We have, I think, about 30 different nationalities amongst those 250 employees, speaking about 50 languages. Oh, good day.
We have the thumbs up.
Hey,
we're good.
Yeah, so 50 different languages. So, that office has a lot of inbuilt diversity. And when you have an office and a culture like that, there's been a lot of studies that show that there is a very positive correlation between diversity in workforce and sort of just innovation. And I think that having that really helps. Having different viewpoints, having different backgrounds really helps sort of like the mindset that leads to how can we solve these customer problems rather than just sort of a homogenous, let's do things the way we've always done. So as we're developing more of our co-creation capabilities, working with more of these customers, we want to do that more with Barcelona because the culture in our office here is so strong and so diverse. And so that's, not to say that our other offices aren't, but it does mean that we're able to identify people who are able to sit amongst people cross-functionally and identify interesting solutions to problems.
Yeah. So in terms of your kind of Barcelona office, your London office, your New York office, we were talking yesterday a little bit about cultural change between those office spaces. What kind of verticals do you focus on in Barcelona, and what do you focus on in London and in New York, and is that based on the culture?
No, it's quite a mix actually. So we have offices, our major offices, Hong Kong, London, Barcelona, Princeton, New York, Minneapolis. They all have a different office vibe, I guess. It's interesting though, across our teams, especially due to sort of adoption, we love Slack, for instance. So you start to see a lot more, as communication increases, a lot more sort of like this kind of hybrid culture emerging across the company, and I think there's a lot to be seen in the future on that. But we focus mainly the tasks and the work. Traditionally, especially on engineering, we focus, the Minneapolis team will work on this thing, and the New York team will work on this thing. But we are trying to mix it up a little bit. The reason being is, well, amongst many reasons, is that if you have people communicating and working on the same problem, you again are sort of injecting a little bit of diversity of thought into the development process. It also provides it breaks down a little bit of a thing that I think many companies, as they grow larger, start to develop, which is a kind of an us versus them mentality, where you say, well, everything we develop in London is perfect, but we have to rely on the guys in Princeton. And you have, if you, at least start getting people to work on projects across borders, it breaks down some of that need. And that's also incredibly important for innovation, right? Because companies, all too often, especially bigger companies, when they set up like a innovation program, it's typically sort of a ring-fenced area, which then leads to another one of these us versus them mentalities, right? Where people are like, well, if those guys are the only people who are allowed to innovate, then what am I doing, right? And so we've been relatively successful in kind of breaking down a lot of that. Our innovation programs are actually much more facilitated centrally, but involve people from across the company, cross-functionally. We're definitely trying to move towards a model of Dow Jones being a lot more of a distributed company, as we heard earlier, but easier said than done for a company that has 137 years of ways of working.
So kind of on that topic of distributed culture, remote work is quite a large topic just now. There's a lot of challenges that come with it, such as availability, such as time zones. How do you approach remote work at Dow Jones, and what lessons can we learn from that as startups?
Yeah, it's I would say that we definitely don't have it 100% right, and we're constantly experimenting with it. We being a older business, a lot of the newsroom always existed as a physical place where the Wall Street Journal journalists would go and work and put together the paper. These days, you don't necessarily need to have a single newsroom in a single place. So we have been doing things like breaking out parts of our news operation across borders, and things like engineering. We're increasingly working on how we can allow for remote work. We actually do have a lot of remote workers. Different roles, though, require a different amount of connecting back to the company. So our data research teams, for instance, primarily based here in Barcelona, we do have a great culture of remote work as required, but at the same time trying to balance that with a sense of belonging and being part of an organization. And while tools like Slack and like Google Hangouts, which we use, are great, there's still that balance of trying to make sure that people are connecting, those sort of serendipitous moments, which I know a lot of people downplay and say, that's sort of, but having those people at least present and able to communicate face to face, it's not going away. And so for us, it's trying to balance, like, how can we be as distributed as possible, make sure that our employees are comfortable, are operating and working at their best, but also still being part of our organization.
Perfect. So we've got a little bit of time left, time for just one last question. Just to kind of loop it back, and if anyone in the room can kind of take one thing out of what an established business can teach startups, what would you think that would be?
Yeah, I think for me personally, having having mainly worked at tech companies and startups, working for a company like Dow Jones, there's been a lot of learning and a lot of sort of personal growth that I've had to go through. And I think one of the things that I would say is, established companies, it's always too easy, especially for startups and especially for our startup competitors out there, to say, oh, they move so slowly and they can't possibly keep up and they have so much legacy stuff. But at the same time, like, there is a lot of agility within the company. Sometimes it's hard to see that from the outside of a massive multinational. Yeah. But the thing that I would say for most startups is that nobody's in a startup because they want to be just running a startup forever. Like, not to rain on anybody's parade, but it's every company, when it grows to a certain stage, starts running into these changes in risk tolerance and understanding, the culture, and we have to. It is a reality, and sort of you don't want to just stick your head in the sand and assume like that will never happen to us, but you can start sort of preparing early as a company grows to sort of set cultural norms to set the understanding that yes, at some point, it's not just going to be VC backers who you have to convince. It's going to be accountants and spreadsheets, and that's part of growth, but it shouldn't be a bad thing, I guess.
Yeah. So in conclusion, the fun stops.
No,
You have to deal with
Were you
spreadsheets.
listening at all?
Thank you very much, Clancy.
Thank you very much. I really
And thanks for
appreciate it.
joining us.
Thank you.
Cheers.